The first thing they took was her name. Not the sound of it. They didn't bother learning the sound of it. They took the function of it. Saren Vashari became registry number KV2291, inked in coalition standard over her left collarbone in letters she couldn't see without a mirror, in a compound that didn't have mirrors. The second thing they took was her silence. Not because they wanted her to speak, they didn't. They took it because she had used it as armor, the careful quiet of someone who had learned that words cost money and she had none to spare. In the labor compound at Kesh Tau, silence was also a resource. It had to be rationed. I know this because she told me later, not all at once. Piece by piece, the way you clear a rockfall, move one stone, then another, never sure when the weight above will decide to settle. My name is Cale Draven. I was a buyer's agent for a mid-range or consortium, which means I evaluated extraction contracts on behalf of clients who didn't want to visit sites themselves. It's not glamorous work. It involves a lot of transport, a lot of dust, a lot of meals eaten over contract printouts in narrow station canteens, and a very particular kind of professional mistrust that lives in your jaw. You stop taking documents at face value. You stop taking people at face value. You learn to look for the places where the numbers don't line up and the language gets slightly too careful. It's a skill set. It is not, on its face, the kind of skill set that saves anyone. I would have told you that myself before Kesh Tau. I was mistaken for a different buyer's agent at Kesh Tau station, by a foreman who had been paid to make sure the other buyer's agent never filed his report. The other buyer's agent, a woman named Tave Oren, whom I have since met and who is, I am told, entirely capable of handling herself, had been asking questions about the labor bond facility's extraction output records, which didn't match the registered workforce numbers, which was the kind of discrepancy that is very interesting if you read contracts for a living and very dangerous if the people running the operation know you've noticed it. I want to be precise about this. I wasn't heroic. I wasn't in the right place at the right time because I had good instincts or because I sensed injustice. I was in the wrong place at entirely the wrong time because two transport manifests had the same routing identifier and someone at Kesh Tau Station Logistics had not flagged the duplication. I stepped off the personnel transport with a bag and a clipboard and a reference number that matched the one on the foreman's list of problems to disappear, and that was that. They put me in the holding compound while they sorted out who I was. They said it would take 3 days. It took 8 months. The holding compound at Kesh Tau was not technically a slave compound. The coalition had very specific definitions about what constituted forced labor under the Compact of 09, and the Kesh Tau operation had clearly been advised by someone who understood those definitions intimately. What it was, technically, was a labor bond facility, workers bonded against debt contracts, working off obligations that had been, in many cases, incurred on their behalf by family members or creditors who had then sold the contracts on the open market. The distinction was meaningful on paper. It was not particularly meaningful in the compound. There were 41 of us when I arrived. 37 Vashari, 3 humans, myself, and 2 others who'd come in on labor contracts they hadn't read carefully enough, and 1 Tharosi male who communicated almost exclusively in a dialect none of us spoke, and whom we designated by mutual wordless agreement as a barometric instrument. When he was calm, the foremen were manageable. When he was not calm, we all stopped drawing attention to ourselves. The Vashari are a copper-skinned people, thin and tall, with silver bioluminescent whorls along the temples and collarbones that activate when they are in pain or under emotional stress. In my first weeks, I couldn't read them at all. The compound lighting was too dim for the whorls to show clearly during the workday, and the foreman had learned not to look too carefully anyway. What you noticed, if you paid attention, was that the light coming off a group of Vashari in the early morning before work start had a quality to it, not quite a glow, not quite a collective shiver. That told you more about what the previous day had been than anything anyone said. I paid attention. It was the only thing I had. Saren was KV 2291, but she had been in the compound for 11 months before I arrived, and everyone who mattered, which is to say, everyone, called her Saren. I found this out on my third day, when I asked the woman assigned to the bunk above mine why the foreman had been speaking for 10 minutes to an empty corner of the processing hall. She was a Vashari woman named Orath, working off her deceased husband's mining debt with a patience that I found both admirable and devastating, and she said, without looking up from the bolt she was threading, "He thinks Saren is in there. She's been rerouting his search patterns for 4 months." I asked how. She memorized his schedule and then she memorized his assumptions about where she'd be. She goes somewhere else. A pause. Don't talk to her directly the first few days. I asked why. She'll assume you want something. The work was ore processing. Long shifts on vibrating sorting tables, running extraction residue through a graduated filter system that separated the marketable mineral deposits from the waste clay. It was loud, it was fine particulate, and it coated everything, your skin, your lungs, your hair, in a faint reddish film that washed out imperfectly and permanently tinted the whites of your eyes a pale orange pink. After 3 months, I stopped noticing the color in other people's eyes. After 5 months, I forgot it wasn't natural. I was assigned to Table 7 with Orath and a Vashari man named Davin who communicated mostly in glances and had an extraordinary memory for the sorting table's mechanical anomalies. The table's left side vibration pad had a 3-second lag at the start of each shift. If you didn't account for it, you lost the first sorting pass and had to double run the residue. Davin had charted the lag to within a half-second and ran a compensating manual sweep during those 3 seconds that recovered about 90% of the first pass. He'd taught Orath. Orath taught me. On my 4th day, I asked Davin how he'd figured it out. He glanced at the end of the table where no one was standing. "Saren showed me," he said, and went back to work. She came to me on day 9. I was on my bunk during the half-hour free period before lights out, making a record of what I'd learned about the compound's physical layout in the condensation on the wall using my thumbnail, which I then wiped off immediately. This is less dramatic than it sounds. I wasn't planning an escape, and the layout wasn't a secret. I was doing what I did professionally, which was map things, because mapping things was what kept me functional when nothing else was in my control. If I knew the shape of a place, I knew which parts of it I could use. She sat down on the bunk across the narrow aisle from mine, which was technically unoccupied and technically belonged to everyone, and looked at the condensation marks on the wall, the ones I'd already wiped. "What were you drawing?" she said. Her voice was low and carried a particular quality, not flat, not hostile, but stripped of the social filigree that voices usually have. Like she decided the words themselves would have to carry all the weight, and she wasn't going to give them anything extra to carry. I told her the truth, the compound's physical layout from memory, marking what I knew and what I didn't. She looked at the blank wall for a moment. "You've missed the secondary storage units on the north side," she said, "and the foreman's common room is off the east corridor, not the central. Also the water recycling station, it's here." She pointed at an area of wall well to the left of where I'd been drawing. "Not there." "How do you know all that?" "I walk the compound." "When?" "During his search patterns." She stood up to leave, then stopped. "The Table 7 lag lasts 3.4 seconds. Davin is compensating at 3. You're compensating at 4. Neither of you is quite right." She left. I sat for a while looking at the blank wall. Then I started a new condensation map, in the right place this time. Here is what I knew about her by day 12, assembled from 3 days of paying the kind of attention I was paid to pay to contracts. She had been in the compound for 11 months. She was Vashari, which meant the silver whorls along her jaw and collarbone were a language I couldn't read yet but could observe. She had reorganized the compound's informal labor economy, the trading of shift assignments, the management of the water ration's flexible margin, the distribution of the compound's 2 functioning portable lights during the evening free period, without ever appearing to be the one who had organized anything. When the foreman looked for her, she was somewhere else. When someone needed to know something about the compound systems, they asked her. When Davin needed to know the table lag, she had told him. She had done all of this in a place that owned her for 11 months, and she had made herself into its most functional resident without making herself into a target. This is a specific kind of intelligence. It's not the intelligence of someone who is trying to survive. Everyone there was trying to survive. It's the intelligence of someone who is trying to ensure that the people around her survive too, while giving no one any reason to stop her. On day 12, I filed a maintenance report with the compound's internal logging system. Not with the foreman who had access to it, but using the system itself, which had a standard coalition issue interface that the operation hadn't bothered to customize. The maintenance report was for Table 7's left side vibration pad. It cited the 3.4-second lag. The system asked for a submitter's registry number. I entered mine. In the signature field, technically a field for an authorizing supervisor, which I didn't have, I wrote, KV 2291. Correct lag 3.4 sec. The maintenance report went into the system. The system, per coalition standard logging requirements, generated a timestamp and a copy that was accessible to anyone with a coalition standard interface query, including, technically, anyone at the coalition administrative level who ran a standard data sweep. Saren didn't say anything about it, but 3 days later, a maintenance crew spent 40 minutes on Table 7's vibration pad, and when work start happened the next morning, Davin ran his compensating sweep at 3.4 seconds, as if he had always known, and Saren was not at Table 7 that morning. But when I saw her at the water ration, she looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't read yet, and then she looked away. Here is what I did not know about her until day 23. Her stepfather's name was Veldarin Ashari. He held a Vashari clan contract, which was legal under the Vashari Compact's debt assignment provisions, which the coalition had allowed to stand under a bilateral non-interference ruling from 2019. The debt itself was documented, 40,000 coalition credits, accrued over 14 months of compulsive Velcan gaming, secured against assets including the adoption guardianship of his stepchildren. Adoption guardianship was a legal category under Vashari clan law. It gave a registered guardian contractual authority over a minor's labor and economic obligations. Saren had been 19. The guardianship papers had been filed 3 years before the debt, at the Coalition Registration Office, with her mother's signature, at a point when her mother was still in the early months of a marriage and trusted the man she had married. I found the contract on day 23, when I managed to access the compound's administrative records through the maintenance logging system's back query function. It was there because someone had built the coalition standard system, assuming workers would have reasonable access to their own labor contracts, which was a sensible assumption for a legitimate facility, and a gap that Kesh Tal's operators had apparently not noticed. I read the contract 4 times. I read it the way I had been trained to read disputed extraction agreements, looking for the places where the language gets too careful, where the numbers require an assumption that isn't stated, where the document's legal weight depends on a definition that's buried in an appendix somewhere. I was good at this. I had been good at it for 11 years. The clause I found was in the Acknowledgement of Terms section. Next to the space where a signatory's thumb impression should have been, there was a notation. Signatory was not present at signing. Thumb impression obtained in absentia per guardian authority clause 14. She hadn't signed it, she hadn't been there. Her stepfather had pressed her thumb into the ink himself. I sat with this information for a long time. The free period was over. Work start came and I went to table 7 and ran the compensating sweep at 3.4 seconds and did not say anything to anyone. After work end, I opened the maintenance log's free text annotation field. It was technically for annotating repair requests. It had no character limit, and I had not yet found evidence that anyone had ever read it for anything other than repair notes. I started writing. "You found the contract," Saren said. It was day 27. She sat across from me again in the same position with the same stripped directness. The compound's lights were at evening level, low, reddish, slightly too warm. The whorls along her jaw were faint, not the pain light, something more like the physiological signature of a thought she was deciding whether to have. "Yes," I said. "And the acknowledgement clause?" "Yes." "I've been here 11 months, she said. 3 people have found the contract before you. One told me it was enforceable and I should accept my situation. One offered to bribe a foreman to mark it discharged in exchange for a pause. Something I didn't do. Another pause measured. The third was a coalition inspector on a routine facility check. She said the bilateral non-interference ruling made the contract legally protected and she was very sorry. I waited. She had more to say. I had learned this already, that her pauses were not the end of a thought. They were the space where she was deciding whether to finish it. "She meant it," Saren said. "The sorry, I could tell she meant it. That was the worst part." She looked at the wall. It didn't change anything. "I know," I said. "You've been writing in the maintenance log," she said. "Yes." I read it. I had written in the free text repair annotation field, across 4 entries, in a format that looked like technical notation but was structured legal documentation, a full account of what I had found. The acknowledgement clause, the in absentia notation, the specific subsection of coalition compact law under which an in absentia thumb impression for a contract of personal labor bond was challengeable on grounds of non-autonomous consent. The bilateral non-interference ruling and the specific exception carved out of it in the 2022 amendment that covered coerced or fraudulent signatory procedures. The applicable Vashari clan law section, under which an adoption guardianship could be challenged for improper use if the guardian had incurred the underlying debt with the express purpose of converting the guardianship to a labor bond contract. I was a buyer's agent. I read contracts. I read the ones I was given and the ones I wasn't given and the ones filed in systems that weren't expecting me to look. I was not a lawyer. I want to be clear about this, and I was clear about it in the documentation. But 11 years of extraction contract work teaches you what challengeable language looks like and which regulatory bodies have jurisdiction over which clauses. "You're not a laborer," she said. "No." "What are you?" I told her. The consortium, the routing error, the missing person report that I had to hope had been filed. She listened without changing her expression, which I had come to understand was not indifference but precision. She listened in a way that didn't interrupt. "So you were put here by accident," she said when I finished. "Yes." "And you have been here 27 days. "Yes." She looked at me. The whorls were doing the slow, barely visible pulse along the line of her jaw. "Why are you writing a legal challenge strategy in a maintenance log?" "Because it's the only place I can write that isn't monitored." "Why are you writing a legal challenge strategy at all?" I thought about what I wanted to say. Not what I could say. There were a lot of things I could say, true things, reasons that were real. I thought about which one was the most honest. "Because the acknowledgement clause is wrong," I said. "It's fraudulent documentation and it's challengeable, and you've been here 11 months and it shouldn't have held this long. And I'm going to keep writing in the maintenance log until I have a complete filing that someone with a coalition standard interface can retrieve and submit." She looked at me for a long time. "What do you want?" she said. Not a question. It was the shape of something she'd asked before, many times in this place and other places, and the asking had always preceded the answer she was dreading. "Nothing," I said. "From you, nothing." The wheels pulsed. "People don't do things for nothing," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm doing it anyway." There is a film, Argentine, 2013, El Desierto, about two people stranded in a desert after a catastrophe they didn't cause, and what happens when the social architecture falls away. I had seen it years before, in a station transit lounge between two contract reviews. It didn't strike me as particularly relevant to my life at the time. What I understood about it later, the desert in that film isn't a metaphor. It's the actual desert desiccating, enormous, indifferent to whether you survive. But what it does is remove every context in which a gesture could be anything except itself. In the outside world, bringing someone water is social. It carries history, implication, debt, expectation, the weight of every other time someone has brought or not brought water. In the desert, it's just water. You're thirsty. Here is water. That's all. Keshtal compound was a desert. The social architecture was gone. No courts, no coalition observers, no family, no external record of anything. What you did in the compound, you did because it was what you were, not because anyone was watching or because it built toward anything or because there was any benefit to you in doing it. There was no benefit to me in writing those maintenance log entries. There was no benefit to me in filing the table lag report. There was no benefit to me in any of this. Saren had been in the compound for 11 months. She had learned in those 11 months that when someone did something for you, they wanted something back. This was not a cynicism she had brought in with her. She had verified it, empirically, dozens of times in the compound and before the compound. Her stepfather had been kind to her mother for 3 years. The inspector had been sorry and then filed the non-interference ruling. The foreman offered deals that weren't deals. The other two people who had found her contract had shown her the shape of kindness before they named what they wanted. She was precise about this, Saren. She had run the data. She had reached the correct conclusion given the data she had. I was working with different data. Not better data, just different. I had 11 years of looking for what contracts actually said instead of what they were presented as saying. I had a professional habit of finding the gap between presentation and reality. What the compound's data said was that no one did anything for nothing. What the maintenance log said was something else. She read the maintenance log for 3 weeks before she said anything about it. "You had the right structure," I said, on day 31, looking at the document she'd built from 4 months of annotation field notes. "You were missing the 2022 amendment and 2 defined terms." She had shown me her version, quietly, without announcement, the way she did everything. She'd been building her own case in the same maintenance annotation field, in a different format, using the legal language she'd been able to derive from the contract documentation itself, and from the compact law citations she'd found by reverse engineering the facility's coalition registration records. It was good. It was genuinely good, and she had done it with no contract law background, in a maintenance log field, over 4 months of working it around a full processing shift schedule. "The compact uses autonomous consent as a defined term," I said. "Not just consent. If you use the general term, the challenge targets the wrong legal standard. It gets dismissed on technical grounds before anyone reads the substance." She nodded. She was reading as I talked, which I'd learned to understand as the most focused kind of attention she gave, not looking at me but tracking the argument. "The March 14th date," she said. "The 2022 amendment, you have the 8th. "The 8th is when it was ratified in committee," I said. "The 14th is when it entered force." "If you cite the wrong entry date, the submission gets kicked back on procedural grounds," I said. "Yes." She looked at me. "How do you know the 14th? "I read the amendment when it was filed," I said. I was working a labor contract case in the Doral sector. The amendment changed the parameters. I paused. I didn't know then that I'd need to cite it in a maintenance log. The whorls did something, a short, precise pulse. It took me another month to understand that this particular pulse was what happened when she found something wryly funny and did not permit herself to show it in her face. We worked for 3 hours that evening, combining her structure with my citations, correcting the defined terms, adjusting the date. We read the combined document 3 times. She found a redundancy in the second argument. I removed it. She read it again. "This is submittable," she said. "Yes," I said. "I've been trying to write this for 4 months." "I know," I said. "You had the architecture right. The citations were the gap." She was quiet for a while. The whorls were doing the slow, complex motion I'd been trying to read for days, not the pain light, not the short pulse, something longer and more involved. Like a full paragraph in a language where I could make out individual words but not yet the sentence they built. "I want to add a section," she said, "about the guardianship filing date." I looked at her. "He filed the adoption guardianship papers 3 years before the debt," she said. "I found the registration date in the coalition records. If the challenge is only about the acknowledgement clause, the question is whether the guardian had legitimate authority. If the challenge includes the guardianship itself, if I can show the guardianship was registered in preparation for a debt he was already incurring, then the underlying contract has no valid source authority," I said. "Yes." I thought about this. It was right. It was more right than what we'd built. It was also more complex, required an additional filing track, required evidence from the Vashari clan registry about when the debt gambling had started relative to when the guardianship papers had been filed. "I don't have access to the clan registry records," I said. "I do," she said, "or I know how to get to them." He used the compound's coalition administrative terminal to request a guardianship confirmation 6 months after I arrived. I saw the reference number. The registry records are linked through the coalition administrative system. She had been here 11 months. She had been building this case in pieces for months, waiting for the one element she couldn't get on her own. The compact law citations that would make a challenge hold up in a review proceeding. We added the guardianship section. It took 2 more evenings. She wrote most of it. I corrected the legal standard language. She found 2 errors in my corrections. We submitted on day 38. The filing went in through the maintenance log system, formatted as a repair request with the challenge documentation in the free text annotation field, and the compact law citations formatted as equipment serial numbers in a way that looked like technical maintenance data, until you cross-referenced the serial numbers against the coalition equipment registry, which they didn't match, and then against the coalition compact law index, where they matched precisely. I have been told this was elegant. I did not experience it as elegant at the time. I experienced it as 3 nights of testing formatting options, while Saren leaned over my shoulder and said things like the serial number field accepts alphanumeric, so the site format works, but the paragraph structure will flag as anomalous if anyone runs a format audit, and I found an internal system template that the maintenance log uses for multi-page entries. If we use that header, the length won't trigger an anomaly flag. She knew the system better than I did. She had been studying it for 4 months. On day 40, 2 days after the submission, she said to me, "I want to ask you something." We were at the water ration station. The evening ration was brief and the line moved fast. You learned not to take up time at the station. We had learned this independently, and had both developed the habit of having the conversation we were going to have during the walk back. "You can ask me anything," I said. "I know," she said. It was the first time she'd said that without the edge in it. "You were a buyer's agent for a consortium," she said, walking. "You had a career, you had," she paused, "a life outside here." "Yes." Why does it matter to you that my contract is wrong? I thought about how to answer this. I had thought about it before, because she was the kind of person who would eventually ask it, and I wanted to have an honest answer ready. Because it is wrong, I said. That's most of it. I read contracts. I know when something is falsified. When I see falsified documentation, I want to correct it. It's compulsive, honestly. It's what I do. Most of it, she said. The rest of it is that you have been here for 11 months, I said, building a case in a maintenance log because you couldn't get the compact citations you needed, and you didn't stop, and you were right about the structure, and it seemed wrong that the one thing standing between you and a valid filing was that I happened to be in the Doral sector when the 2022 amendment went into force. She walked for a few steps without saying anything. The evening wind off the northern range was coming in, which meant it was approximately 1900 hours, which meant the free period was ending. I stopped expecting someone to come, she said, 6 months ago. I decided I was going to file the case myself, and it was probably not going to work, but I was going to file it anyway, because the alternative was to accept that the contract was real. It's not real, I said. I know, she said. That is the only thing I have been certain of for 11 months. We reached the bunk block. She stopped at the entrance. Thank you, she said. It was precise, the way she said everything, not excessive, not deflecting. Just, this happened. I am acknowledging it happened. You did most of the work, I said. I know, she said, and went in. The filing sat for 16 days. In those 16 days, the Tharosi man's comm broke once, which meant a bad week. Orath's sorting quota was increased unilaterally by a foreman who was, I was beginning to understand, specifically punishing her for a water ration dispute she'd flagged 3 months before I arrived. I spent 4 days building a documentation trail for the quota change, citing the coalition labor monitoring provisions, and getting it into the annotation field in a form that would read as a secondary labor conditions filing alongside the contract challenge. Saren reviewed it. She found 3 errors. She said, "This section on quota modification, you're citing the general labor provision. The specific provision for labor bond facilities is subsection 14. The general provision gets kicked to a different review body. Subsection 14 goes to the Compact Review Board." Which is where the contract challenge is, I said. Where the contract challenge will be, she said, if the Compact Review Board accepts jurisdiction, which they will because the documentation is correct and they are required to. She paused. Subsection 14. I changed it. On day 54, the filing received a response. It came through the maintenance log system as an automated acknowledgement, request under review, estimated response time 14 days. But the case reference number was a coalition compact review number, not a maintenance ticket number. I looked at the number for a long time. Saren was at the water ration station. I walked there. It was not the water ration time, which meant I had used up 3 minutes of the shift's sanctioned movement window, which was exactly the kind of thing that got logged. I didn't care. I showed her the reference number on the terminal. She looked at it. The whorls along her jaw were doing the slow, complex motion, longer and more sustained than I had seen it, and I watched them and tried to read the sentence they were building. "That's a compact review reference," she said. "Yes." "They assigned it for review." "Yes." "That means they read it." "Yes." The whorls ran the full length of her jaw and collarbone. The slow, complex motion, long and sustained, and I was 54 days into learning her language, and I could not yet read the full sentence, but I understood its weight. She did not cry. I want to be clear about this because there is a way of telling this story where she cries here, and I have told parts of this story to people who expect her to cry here, and it is not wrong to expect it. It would be a natural moment for it. But what she actually did was stand very still, for a long time with the whorls moving, and then she said, "He pressed my thumb into the ink while I was asleep." I let that settle. "I know," I said. "I woke up and my mother was crying and he said I had agreed to the terms." She paused. She believed him. She wanted to believe him. She needed it to be something I had chosen. I did not say anything. The shift was running. We needed to go back. "She came to the gate on month 3, Saren said. "She wanted to visit." They turned her away. "I don't know if she knows I'm still here. I don't know if she has been back." I made a note of this. It was important, and I didn't know yet what to do with it, but I held it. "He pressed your thumb into the ink," I said. "That's what happened. That's the whole account." She looked at me. The whorls were lit along the full line of her collar and neck and jaw, and I didn't have the word yet for what I was looking at, but I was going to learn it. Later she would tell me it was Vel Sahan, a Vashari kinship term, the one who saw what happened and holds the true account, used for clan elders who maintain oral histories, used in legal proceedings for someone who can testify to disputed facts from direct knowledge, used, she said sometimes, for something else. Something she hadn't used it for in a long time. "What do you want?" she said. Third time, third version. "Still nothing," I said, "from you." She looked at me. "I know," she said quietly, "different from the first 2 times. The first time it had been disbelief. The second time it had been something being weighed. This time it was recognition." The compact review took 41 days. During those 41 days, the compound ran its normal schedule, because there was nothing stopping it from doing so. A filing in a maintenance log was not an injunction. It was a document in a system. Until the review process reached an outcome, the sorting tables ran and the quotas ran and the water ration ran on its cycle, and the foremen continued their routines, and the Tharosi man continued to function as a barometric instrument. What changed was smaller than that. It was the kind of change that happens between 2 people who have decided, without saying so, that they are going to keep going, and who now know what the other person is like when they keep going. I knew by day 40 that Saren worked better in the second half of the shift than the first, not because she tired early, but because she spent the first half orienting, mapping the day's variables, and the second half operating on the map she had built. I knew she ate her full water ration every day even when she wasn't thirsty, because the next day's thirst was a variable she could control. I knew she kept one evening of the free period entirely to herself. No maintenance log work, no grievance routing, no contract discussion, and used it in a way I respected enough not to ask about. She knew I could not sleep past 400 in the compound's morning silence, which was not really silence, but the absence of the industrial noise I'd spent 2 months learning to ignore, and which became very loud when it stopped. She knew I read contracts by marking pressure points with my thumbnail even when I didn't have a contract in front of me, which is why I was always drawing on whatever surface was available. She knew I had a specific dislike for the compound's third meal, a processed protein block that the 2 other humans had made peace with, and which I had not, that she found something she did not show in her face but which showed, faintly, in the whorls. We talked during the walk back from the water ration mostly. 3 minutes most evenings. Sometimes more in the last half hour before lights out, when the bunk block was quiet and the day was done, and there was nothing left to solve that evening. She told me about the Velkan games once. Not her stepfather's games, the game itself, which was a Vashari probability and reading game, something between cards and negotiation, where the object was not to have the best hand, but to correctly read the other player's confidence in their hands. It was a game about watching people, she said, about learning to tell the difference between certainty and performance. I said I thought she would be very good at it. She said she had never played it, that her stepfather had played it badly, which was how he had lost, and that she had watched him play it badly for 3 years, and had understood that the thing he did wrong was he could not believe that other people's readings of him could be accurate. He always assumed he was more opaque than he was. I said I thought that was a specific kind of arrogance. She said yes, and that it had cost him 40,000 credits and one daughter, and that she thought the total was about right. The Worrells did the short, precise pulse. The one I'd learned was what happened when she found something really funny. I said I thought so too. In those 41 days, I built 3 additional filings. 3 other Vashari workers, Davin, and 2 others I had not yet spoken to directly, came to Saren and asked whether the same filing could be submitted for their contracts. Saren brought them to me. We reviewed each contract. 2 of them had acknowledgement clause problems of the same pattern as Saren's. One had a different issue, a quota fraud problem, where the registered debt total had been inflated in the 3rd renegotiation by a creditor who had added fees that weren't in the original contract. We built all 3 filings. Saren reviewed each one and corrected, across all 3, 4 citation errors, 2 defined term errors, 1 structural argument that she rewrote entirely in better form than I had managed. The quota fraud filing she took primary authorship on, because she had spent 4 months understanding how the compound's creditor structures worked, and she knew the right accounting arguments better than I did. We submitted all 3. The Compact Review Office assigned them case numbers. 41 days after the first submission, the oversight team arrived. 6 people. 2 compact law officers, a labor bond specialist, a medical officer, a translator, and a young woman in a coalition administrative uniform who carried a tablet and said very little and who turned out to be the officer in charge. Her name was Reviath, and she was Vashari, which I learned later was not an accident. The Compact Review Office had assigned a Vashari officer, because the bilateral non-interference ruling had clan law implications that required a native law expert, and because the guardianship fraud filing required someone who could pull Vashari clan registry records. She came to the compound on day 1 of the inspection. She reviewed the filings. She interviewed the contract holders. She reviewed the maintenance log, all of it, including the annotation fields, with the careful attention of someone who has been doing this work for a long time and is still, occasionally, surprised by what she finds. She spoke to Saren for 40 minutes. I was not in the room. Afterward, she came to me. "You're the buyer's agent," she said. "Yes." "Detained here 91 days. "Yes." "The routing error that placed you here has been identified," she said. "Your consortium filed a missing person report on day 12. There's been an investigation. You were difficult to locate because the person at Kesh Tal Station who created the routing confusion had an interest in the investigation not resolving." She looked at me steadily. "You'll be released with the contract holders." "The filings," I said. "The 4 filings are under active compact review," she said. KV 2291's contract, the in absentia acknowledgement clause, is not a close question. The 2022 amendment was written specifically for this pattern. Her contract will be nullified." She paused. "The guardianship fraud track will take additional time. We'll need clan registry records and a Vashari tribunal proceeding, but the contract nullification doesn't wait for that." "Her mother," I said. "She came to the gate on month 3, I don't." "She has been filing complaints with the Vashari clan registry since month 2, Reviath said. "She was told the contract was valid and the compound was within its rights." She continued filing, a pause that was not quite expressionless. "We contacted her 4 days ago when the inspection was scheduled. She is at the station." I sat with this for a moment. "She'll be here," Reviath said, "when the nullification is processed." The processing took 2 days. During those 2 days, the compound ran its normal schedule. The sorting tables ran, the quotas ran, we worked. On the second night, Saren did not sleep. I know because I didn't sleep either, and we had developed, across 93 days, a mutual awareness of the other's presence in the dark that I think develops in close quarters with someone you have come to trust completely, which is not the same thing as someone you like, though we had become that too. She came and sat across from me in the dark, sometime in the middle of the second night, and said nothing for a long time. "I don't know what to do after," she said finally. I waited. "I've spent 11 months learning how to live here," she said. "I know this place. I know the table lags and the foreman's patterns and the water cycle and the maintenance system's back doors. I know the annotation fields and the document formats and the exact legal language that makes a challenge hold up in review." A pause. "I don't know what I know outside this place anymore." I thought about this. It was a real problem and not one that a simple answer could address. "You know the 2022 Compact Amendment better than the Compact Review Officer does," I said. Reviath had to look up the March 14th entry date. "You knew it." A pause. "You rewrote the structural argument on the quota fraud filing," I said. "It was better than what I had." "That's a narrow skill set," she said. "All skill sets are narrow," I said. "That one happens to matter. There's a backlog at the Compact Review Board. There are more contracts like yours." She was quiet. The whorls were doing the slow, complex motion in the dark, barely visible at this light level, a faint phosphorescence along the line of her jaw. "I don't know how to be outside a place that is trying to stop me," she said. "You'll learn," I said. "It's a smaller skill set than the one you already have." She made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite not a laugh. The first time I had heard that sound. I filed it carefully. "What do you do after here?" she said. "Return to work," I said. "Probably. Once the investigation resolves. Not for the same consortium. They had 12 days to start looking before the missing person protocol triggered automatically. I'll find other clients." Buyer's agent. Contract evaluation. Different firm, maybe. The skill set transfers. She was quiet again. "My mother," she said. "She filed for month 2, I said. She didn't stop." The whorls ran the full length of her jaw and collar. The long, slow motion, and I had been learning to read it for 3 months, and I knew this sentence. "I thought she believed him," Saren said quietly. "I thought she needed to so she could stay." "Maybe she did," I said, "at first." And then she started filing. A long silence. "I would like," she said, carefully, in the particular register she used for things that cost her something to say, "to know what outside here is like. With someone who has already seen what I'm like inside a place that is trying to stop me." The whorls were lit, full and clear, the slow, complex sentence I had been learning to read. "I would like that too," I said. They called the contract holders to the administrative office one at a time. Saren was second. She was in there for 22 minutes. I was in the corridor. I had decided to be in the corridor, and no one had told me not to be. When she came out, her mother was with her. Her mother was a tall woman, copper-skinned, with silver whorls that were lit so intensely they were nearly white. I had not seen whorls that bright before. They lit the corridor with a quality that was something between grief and relief, and those two things are not, I learned later, always separate in Vashari. She had both of Saren's hands held in both of hers, and they were not speaking. Neither of them was speaking, and the light between them was something I did not have language for in Coalition Standard. It was a conversation in a register. I was going to spend a long time learning. I stayed in the corridor. This was their moment. After a while, Saren looked up. She saw me. She said something to her mother. Her mother looked at me. The careful assessment of someone who had spent 2 years filing complaints on behalf of someone she loved, who was looking at the person who had been in the same place as her daughter for 3 of those months and had done something with that time. She nodded once precisely. I nodded back. The legal aftermath took 3 months, which I spent at the Coalition Administrative Station at Kesh Tau. Partly, the investigation required my testimony. Partly, the 3 secondary filings required someone with contract law background. Partly, mostly, Saren was there. She was working with Reviath. It turned out that 4 months of building a legal case in a maintenance annotation field, reviewed and corrected by a compact law officer who kept saying, "Where did you develop this?" had produced something that looked, functionally, like supervised paralegal preparation in labor bond compact law. Reviath filed a formal request with the Coalition Administrative Corps to have Saren's work on the secondary filings credited as supervised legal experience. It was an unusual request. It was approved on the grounds that the 2022 amendment citations demonstrated substantive expertise, and the Compact Review Board had a backlog, and the backlog was real. Veldaren Ashari was brought before a Vashari clan tribunal on a fraudulent guardianship claim. The tribunal reviewed the in absentia thumb impression, the adoption guardianship records, the contract documentation, and the clan registry filing date against the gaming debt accrual timeline, and found, after 4 hours of deliberation, that the guardianship had been fraudulently registered in preparation for a debt he was already accruing. He was stripped of the guardianship, ordered to repay the contract value to the labor bond facility as damages, removed from the clan registry, and barred from future guardianship filings. Saren's clan registry record, which had listed her as debt-bonded ward, current contract holder, Kesh Tau Labor Facility, was updated. The new entry read, Vashari Freeborn, no active bonds. She stood at the Coalition office's records terminal and read it. She was there for a long time. I was standing next to her, which was where I had been standing, increasingly, for the last several months. "It's right now," she said. "Yes," I said. "It was wrong for 3 years, almost 4. "I know." She looked at the record. The whorls were lit along the full run of her jaw and collarbone and neck, the slow, complex motion, the long sentence. I had been learning this language for 4 months now, and I was reading more of it. "I would like," she said, "to go somewhere that is not a compound or an administrative station." "Yes," I said, "where?" She looked at me. The expression on her face was the one I had been learning to read, the one she'd used that night in the compound when she said I would like to know what outside here is like. The Vashari word for it was Vel Sahan, but not the legal meaning, the kinship meaning, the bearing of a true account. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I would like to go there with you." "Yes," I said. The whorls were lit and clear, full and sustained, white-silver in the office's standard lighting, and she was 22 years old, and she had a clan registry entry that said Vashari Freeborn, no active bonds, and she looked at me with an expression that belonged to no one but her and had been built by no one but her, out of 3.5 years of knowing what it meant when someone pressed your thumb into ink while you were sleeping, and out of 11 months of building a case in a maintenance annotation field, and out of 95 days of watching someone do things in a place that had no audience for them. "I'm going to find my mother," she said. "She's in the station cafe. She said she wanted to eat something that wasn't compound rations." "That seems exactly right," I said. "Come with me," she said. Not a question, not a plea, not a negotiating position, a choice made cleanly out loud by someone who had just gotten them back. I came with her. Oreth was released 8 months after Kesh Tau closed its labor bond operations. Her contract had been legitimate. Her husband's debt had been legally incurred. The assignment to her had followed clan law, but the facility's labor conditions audit found 17 violations, and the remediation process included an adjustment to Oreth's discharge timeline to account for 14 months of unlogged overtime. She sent me a message when she was out. It said, "The table 7 lag is up to 4 seconds now. I told the new workers. They are compensating at 3.4. Your annotation is still in the maintenance log." Someone printed it out and put it on the wall. I wrote back and told her the lag had drifted, and someone should file a new repair request. She sent back, I already did. I cited the original annotation for the 3.4 baseline. The maintenance crew arrives Thursday. Orath is doing fine. The Tharosi man was released 2 weeks before Orath. His contract had also been fraudulently registered, part of a pattern the Compact Review Board identified across 4 Kesh-Tal-associated facilities. His clan was notified. He left without ceremony, which was consistent with his general approach to things. Saren is a compact law specialist now. Labor bond cases mostly, with a focus on the bilateral non-interference rulings and the 2022 amendment exceptions, which she understands with a granularity that has become professionally noted. The Compact Review Board offered her a staff position 18 months after the Kesh-Tal case closed. She negotiated the title and the caseload parameters before she accepted, which Reviath told me she had expected. Her mother lives in the same district. They eat together on the days when neither of them is traveling for work, which is not all days but most. I work with a coalition legal firm, now Contract Evaluation for disputed extraction rights cases. It means I read a lot of contracts. I still find the back doors. The skill set transferred, as I told Saren it would. When we are in the same location and I have a case that touches on compact law, she reviews my filings. She still corrects my defined term errors, of which there continue to be, she notes, a consistent number. I have been doing this for several years. The number has not gone down. I have learned to read the whorls. Not perfectly, it's a full language and I am still learning. But I know the slow, complex motion. I know what it means when the light runs the full length of her jaw and collarbone and neck. I know the difference between the thought pulse and the pain light and the thing she did in the administrative office, standing at the records terminal, reading the entry that said Vashari Freeborn, no active bonds. I know the word Velsahin. I know it's a kinship term. I know what kind of kinship, and I know she uses it for me. And I know it is the most precise thing she has given me, because she is very precise about what she gives. The maintenance log at Kesh-Tal still has my annotation in it, apparently, printed out and on the wall. The Table 7 lag is 4 seconds now. Someone should file a new repair request. But the record is right. The entry that matters is right. Vashari Freeborn, no active bonds, under her own name, correct. That part is right.